So here we are in the 2021 Jeep Compass, and it's been a long time since I've had the opportunity to drive a Compass, and I get to spend a day or two with this one, so I thought I'd do sort of a test drive as literally first impressions upon driving the Compass. So stepping inside the Compass, there's a couple things I just noticed just kind of right off the bat, just some odd interior elements. So this is like a sort of middle of the road trim, and it seems like the screen just has this huge sort of ugly black plasticky surround, and I'm sure there's like an optional larger screen, but it just looks very cheap with all this sort of glossy plastic that's gonna get scratched up regardless of how well you take care of it. It is pretty responsive though, the infotainment system. Everything seems to respond pretty quickly. It boots up right away, not really any sort of huge delays or anything. So I think it's good in that regard. And the Uconnect system is pretty well known for being sort of one of the more responsive, better infotainment systems out there. Also, it seems like the controls are kind of odd. So like you have the climate control screen here, but then there's other climate controls on the dash sort of lower down mixed in with the radio controls. So it just gets to be a little confusing at first, but I'm sure that's something you'd get used to pretty quickly, I would imagine. A couple more sort of odd quirks. The start-stop button is in kind of an odd location here, protruding out from the steering column. And it seems like the gauge cluster is like really far in the dash, and the dials aren't particularly large, so it's a little difficult to read. But luckily you do have the digital speedometer there right in the middle to just sort of glance down at it quickly. Other than those few little oddities, I really do like the interior of this Compass. I mean, the seats are like a partial leather, partial cloth, which is pretty cool. It has a huge sunroof, and for a smaller crossover, there's plenty of room in this thing. The front seats are pretty comfortable. The back has a little bit more room than I expected, and it does have air vents in the back as well. The cargo area is a decent size, I think. It's relatively comfortable, and like I said, it's decently roomy for a smaller crossover like this. The center console is very narrow. It's very low. It's not intrusive at all. I personally prefer something a little bit higher up, a little more integrated, but I think a lot of people will appreciate the sort of openness that this smaller console gives you. However, I did notice that it's extremely flimsy. It just kind of rocks back and forth very easily. You rest your arm on it and it kind of flops over to the side a little bit. So that's, another element of this interior that could be improved upon. Now that we're at a stop, the start-stop has activated, shutting off the engine, and I will say that it is one of the smoother start-stop systems I've encountered. I've had it on some other vehicles, a Porsche Macan, a Golf GTI, and my F-150 has it as well. And in this car, it's pretty smooth, pretty seamless. Maybe not the best, but definitely not the worst. I like the design of this car personally. I mean, like we were talking the inside, I appreciate the style of it as well. I think it's one of the better looking small crossovers, and the outside is pretty cool to look at as well. It has some of those unique Jeep elements, like the grille, for example. And while I'm not a huge fan of black wheels, it integrates well with the black A-pillars and the roof and everything being black. Creates a sort of unique contrast, and I think is pretty cool, and you don't see that a lot on a lot of modern vehicles. The Jeep Compass, however, is no speed demon. About the furthest thing from it. Once we get through this corner here with a little bit of body roll, when you want to accelerate, you have to get on it and be patient. It definitely does not have the acceleration that some other crossovers might have. The engine sounds okay. It's not a terrible sounding engine, so it does have that going for it, but it's definitely no speed demon. Once you're up to speed, the Jeep Compass is relatively quiet. here and there, and it's doing really well. It's very smooth, and it's just pretty comfortable in that regard. So for my final thoughts on the Jeep Compass, I've been relatively impressed with this car so far. I mean, about 10 or 15 years ago, the Jeep Compass in its first generation was a crap box. It was something that would rust out in 3 to 4 years, be worth absolutely nothing, and it was just a very throwaway sort of car. And now in the second generation, it's significantly nicer and more refined than I was expecting it to be. It's definitely a vast improvement over some of the previous Jeep vehicles. I am, however, kind of disappointed with the lack of modern safety features. I mean, I get that this is a sort of mid-range trim, but even, with it being a 2021, most of the Japanese crossovers have a lot more standard safety equipment, especially the pre-collision braking that will apply the brakes if it thinks you're going to get into a crash. I mean, this doesn't even have that, and that's like one of the most basic of those sort of active safety features that we've come to expect on modern cars.